Hello and welcome back. I'm Dr. Mohit Singh, and today we have gathered today to talk about the PSM recall questions from INI SET November 2020 exam. Many of us must have already appeared for the INI SET exam, and we are very thankful to God and we are very proud of you for the students who have actually cleared this exam. There is another category of students who unfortunately could not clear this exam, and they are appearing for the next exam and preparing for the same. There is third category of students who did not appear in this INI SET exam, but still they are aspiring for the next year PG entrance exam. So specifically talking about the category 2 students who unfortunately could not get the desired ranks or could not clear this exam, I always say in the classes, but you need to understand this point that there are only two outcomes after the exam. Either you win in the exam, or that means that either you pass the exam or you clear the exam or you get what you wanted to do in this exam, or you learn from the exam. You never fail. This exam is just another exam in the life. That's okay. INI CET is just one exam. It's not the end of the world, right? So take this exam as a stepping stone. If you fail once or twice or 5 times or 10 times or 20 times or 100 times, whatever times you fail, but success will only come after you fail. If you get success all the time, it doesn't happen. That is practically not possible. Either you are a superhero or you are some god of Thar. So it doesn't happen in real life. In real life, you get failures and then you succeed and you cherish the sweet memories again. So bache, take this as a stepping stone. After failure only there is success. And this exam has made you much wiser. You think yourself, the way you think about the options, the way you choose the options, you are much more wise now. So with that, let me just get on and start with the questions from INI SET exam. If you talk about, I'll just go back. If you talk about the PSM system in this particular exam, we had around 12 to 14 MCQs from community medicine or their related allied subjects. Out of these, mostly 90% of the MCQs, they were all easy types, nothing very out of the world box. So thankfully to COVID-19 infections, probably at least from my subject, I can say that most of the questions were fairly easy because you have studied so much public health now. Every doctor is an epidemiologist nowadays. So anyways, let's get on and start with the question number 1. I'm starting with the easiest question that you can ever imagine in your dreams. Which of the following is the marker for high stability, for heat stability of the vaccines? Options are VVM, VMV, MMV, VMM. A lot of alphabets they just gathered together. So I think everybody knows this answer. The answer is a vaccine vial monitor. It is a vaccine vial monitor, VVM. MCQ number 1 on VVM. So in this session I'm taking the MCQ because they are very easy. I will be able to finish the session in just 5 to 7 minutes if I don't discuss the allied questions, which are prospective MCQs. So I'll be giving around 5 to 7 points for every MCQ. That's all. So 5-7 points. Question number 1, that are prospective MCQs. Vaccine vial monitor tells you about the freeze sensitivity or the heat sensitivity. What do you want to say? It tells you about the freeze sensitivity or the heat stability or the heat sensitivity. Correct answer is it tells us about the heat sensitivity. Freeze sensitivity is told by shake test. Shake test is a test for freeze sensitivity. Heat sensitivity, we have a vaccine vial monitor. Question number 1. Question number 2. What is a vaccine vial monitor? Vaccine vial monitor, question number 2. Vaccine vial monitor is a chemical indicator which changes the color because of the heat. If the vaccine is not kept at the appropriate desired temperature for a particular set of time, then it is going to change the color. What is the color? How does it change? There is a square. Outside the square, there is a circle. Okay, beta? There is a square, and outside the square there is a circle. The square is light in color, whereas this circle is darker compared to the inner square. So when the vaccine is not kept at the appropriate desired cold chain maintained temperature or at the desired temperature, then this square is going to change the color, and it goes from this color to this color and this color to this color, and at the last it goes even darker. So when will you discard the vaccine? There are two ways to approach VVM. One is you take the percentage change in color. between A, between B, C and D. Now this percentage change is very difficult for visualize, right? You cannot say that this is 0%, this is 10% change. We cannot do that. So the percentage change is not there. We have only two data. Either the vaccine is usable or the vaccine is non-usable. In very simple words, question number 2 is, it is a chemical indicator, and when do you think that the vaccine is not usable? In simple English, when is the discard point? Discard point is the point where the square and the circle, they have the same color. Square and the circle will have the same color. That is called as the discard point. Can you remember this for me? Question number 2, very important. Very important prospective MCQ. So I'm just telling you 5 MCQs. Question number 3. Do you know any types of vaccine vial monitors? Yes, we know vaccine vial monitors could be of several types. We have VVM2, VVM7, VVM14, VVM30. What is this 2, 7, 14, 30? 2, 7, 14, 30? Nothing very special. It stands for the number of days the vaccine will be potent at a specified temperature. MCQ. Question number 3. What is the temperature for categorizing the various VVMs? The temperature, standard temperature, we take it as 37.0 degrees Celsius. So if the vaccine, which is supposed to be kept in a cold chain 2 to 8 degrees Celsius, if it is kept at 37 degrees Celsius, for how much time do you think the vaccine is going to sustain the potency? 2 days, 7 days, 14 days, 30 days, and therefore you have the names of the vaccine: least stable, moderate stability, medium stability, high stability. I would also like to reiterate the point, don't take it for granted that sir told there are different types of vaccine vial monitors. So what is the VVM on BCG and what is the VVM on measles? What is the VVM on pentavalent? You are not going to get this question, because different brand companies are going to use different VVMs for their own vaccine. So if there are measles vaccine made by 2 manufacturers, may use different VVMs. So you can never compare the vaccine vial monitors. However, you should know what are the types of the vaccine vial monitors. Question number 4. The vaccine vial monitors is of course on the vaccine. So it could be placed at 2 points in the vaccine. Either it is on the body of the vaccine, that is on the label of the vaccine, or the vaccine vial monitor will be on the lid of the vaccine or the cap of the vaccine. If the vaccine vial monitor, as you can see, is on the label of the vaccine, that means primarily this vaccine is a multi-dose vial. Why do I say like this? Because if it is on the lid or the neck or the cap or the neck or the lid or the cap of the vaccine, once you open the ampule, the VVM is also lost. And because the VVM is lost, now you are not able to reuse the vaccine. That means these are primarily for single dose vaccines, or these vaccines should be discarded. Please remember, very important MCQ, discarded. They should be discarded at the end of session. Related to this, I would also like you to remember which vaccines are not, last MCQ, which are not under the open vial policy. Which vaccines are not under the open vial policy? Prospective MCQs, these 5 MCQs, which please remember, not under the open vial policies. Mera rota jija. So measles, rotavirus, BCG, JE. These are the vaccines which are not under open vial policy. They have to be discarded at the end of the session. So with that, we have covered the first very basic MCQ, easy MCQ, that is, what is a vaccine vial monitor. Let's move on to question number 2. The quantitative method which is best to study the previous research studies is RCT, cohort studies, meta-analysis, or systematic reviews. What do you think you want to answer over here? The quantitative method which is best to study. So if you take the face of this MCQ, if I just hide this data, the first line, if you just hide this first line, if you take the study which takes into account the previous research, we have discussed it so many times in our lectures in epidemiology that the study of the studies, I said this word, the study of the studies, when you compile many studies and do a research, that is known as evidence-based medicine. Evidence-based medicine, EBM. MCQs on this. Who is the father of evidence-based medicine? The father of evidence-based medicine is David Sackett. Who is the founder of evidence-based medicine? The founder of evidence-based medicine is Gordon Guyatt. Gordon Guyatt. Next is, what are the types of evidence-based medicines? The types of evidence-based medicines, we can have two. We can either have systematic reviews or we can have meta-analysis. Meta-analysis. MCQ, meta-analysis is one of the study which is also the gold standard for establishing causality. Did I say these words? Very important. This meta-analysis is the gold standard for establishing causality. It is one of the best studies to ascertain that what is the risk factor. Meta-analysis is a statistical method. Meta-analysis is a statistical method to compare and compile all the researches which are available and find out the meaningful outcome. A study for assessment about giving iron folic acid on children or in females was done in India. The same study was done in Greece, the same study was done in Germany, the same type of study was done in China. We gathered all the study from India, Germany, China, Portuguese, Africa, Uganda, anywhere in the world, and then we find out the meaningful outcome that is known as meta-analysis. So we have discussed two MCQs. One, who's the founder? Question number 2, what is systematic reviews and meta-analysis? Third, question number 3, what do you do in meta-analysis? Meta-analysis, please remember, we make a forest plot. In the forest plot, there is a diamond. There is a structure that is a diamond, and this diamond tells you about the mean effect. But this is just a recall session that we are doing. If you do not understand anything over here, any point over here, I would sincerely suggest that you please watch the Marrow videos which are available in the mobile application and learn the whole concept, because if I start taking all the concepts over here, it will take a lot of time again. So it's just a cruise through of the rapid revision system. So in meta-analysis, please remember, we make a forest plot. In the forest plot, there is a diamond which tells you the final mean effect of all these studies. So based on this, if you understand this all, you already know that we had done in epidemiology something like this. At the first level, at the bottom, lowest level, you have observational study designs, you have descriptive study designs. Then, better than those is observational study designs, which are analytical study designs, like case control studies, cohort studies. Above, more than this, you have the experimental study designs, experimental study designs, the randomized control trials, non-randomized control trials, and on the top you have two things, that is meta-analysis and systematic reviews. MA stands for meta-analysis, and SR stands for systematic reviews. So which is the best study of choice? The best study of choice is meta-analysis, and the structure that you see is called as the hierarchy of causation. It is called as the hierarchy of causation, and this is what you need to remember. Last MCQ, just one revision point extra over here, that you already have talked what is a case study, what is a case series. You already know what is a cross-sectional study. We already talked about case control studies. We already talked about the cohort studies. We already talked about the experimental designs, that is the randomized clinical trials. We already talked about the systematic reviews, right? We already talked about the meta-analysis. We have already done that much in detail in our sessions in epidemiology. Case studies and case series, I hope you recall, these are descriptive studies. Cross-sectional case control cohort, I think we all know these are analytical studies. Experimental study designs, these are experimental study design, that is randomized clinical trials or the randomized control trials. And meta-analysis, systematic reviews, these are evidence-based medicine. You already know from within your heart that analytical studies will do hypothesis testing, whereas evidence-based medicine will do hypothesis validation. Descriptive studies, they generally may do hypothesis formulation. So if you understand this point, and if you understand this point, I think it is very easy MCQ that the quantitative method, which is best study of previous research studies, the best study, answer will be one and only, that is meta-analysis. Now I come to this point that many times students get confused, especially on the Facebook. I got this points that, sir, they had written quantitative methods. So I would like to reiterate the point. The last MCQ for you to discuss is, do you know there are two types of researches? We can have a quantitative research, we can have a qualitative research. Qualitative research will depend on the words that I say. Qualitative research is something like me and you and some other people are going to chit chat. We are going to have a focused group discussion. We are going to have a focused group discussion. We are going to sit together and chit chat like, how's the health system in India? How's the growth and development of children doing in our particular village? What do you think about the immunization rate? What do you think about the contraceptive acceptance? What family planning methods are more safe, or what do you think are easy to use in daily life, and things like this. This type of research, where you do research in a very systematized way, this type of research is going to use a lot of words. There is no statistics because we are going to talk about the words, right? There's no statistics which are allowed also. There's no statistics which you can apply also. This type of research is usually just like chit chat, and in this we generally do hypothesis generation. You generate an idea that probably this is the cause, this is the reason, or probably this is the problem that we are facing. So you can generate hypotheses, you can find out what problems are actually there, and these are subjective, usually subjective. On the other hand, quantitative data. What is a quantitative research? Quantitative research is any research which talks with the data. Data, what do you mean by data? Data, if you have, then you can do the statistical analysis. You can take case control studies. You know this many people were there, this many risk factors were there, and this is what would happen. So whenever we are talking of statistical data, that is a quantitative research. There is objectivity in that, and they are going to test for the hypothesis. These are all probabilistic method. There is a probability rule, whereas in the qualitative research there is no probability rule. So please remember, behavior testing is what is quantitative research methods, and all these points that you need to remember, that statistical data is what is a quantitative research. So that is what this question had put, that tricky word over there. The keyword was simple answer. Previous research studies were taken, and you want to do a good study analysis. Answer is one and only, that is meta-analysis. Let us move to the question number 3. The discrete probability distribution that expresses the probability of a given number of events in a particular time frame. So what is this? Even if you don't know the answer, if you have seen some of my biostats lecture, I think you should be able to answer it. The probability of a given number of events. So this is number of events which are happening in that particular time frame, are shown by what type of probability? It is not Gaussian distribution, it is not normal distribution, because I think you all know that these two types of data distribution is for quantitative data, where you can calculate the means, and the number of events is what? It is a qualitative data, right? So this is not Gaussian or a normal distribution. Binomial distribution is simple dichotomous distribution. Dichotomous distribution. What is a dichotomous distribution? That is where only two things can occur. Either you pass or you fail. Either you are alive or you are dead. Either you are healthy or you are sick. So if you know that there are 100 people, out of them 20 are diseased, do you know, can you tell me how many people are not diseased? Of course you can tell me 80 people will be non-diseased. Simple. Are you getting it? If the total population is 120 are diseased, remaining 80 will be non-diseased. But let us say I want to draw a distribution for the number of head injury cases in the trauma center in my hospital. So in the trauma center, head injury cases, how many are coming on any day, on let's say Friday night? On Friday night, number of people with head injury come to my trauma center. So on an average, I usually get 10 to 15 cases of head injury cases in my trauma center. So I know how many people are coming. Do I know how many people are not coming? Are you getting it? Are you getting the concept of this? So you know that the number of times the event is going to occur. The number of times the event will occur is known. The number of times the event will occur is known. This is known. But the opposite, other counterpart, the number of times the event does not occur is not known. That is absurd. This type of distribution, bache, please remember, is called as a Poisson distribution. It is for qualitative data where the number of events are taken in a given time frame. That is known as a Poisson distribution. The correct answer to this would be a Poisson distribution. Please remember, for Gaussian distribution or a normal distribution, please remember that normal distribution or a Gaussian distribution, it's a beautiful normal distribution curve where you use basically the quantitative data. The mean, the median and the mode, they all coincide. In this, the standard deviation is equal to 1, the area under curve is equal to 1, the variance is also equal to 1. The two ends never touch the baseline, and the Gaussian distribution is always a bell-shaped bilaterally symmetrical curve. It is always a bell-shaped bilaterally symmetrical curve. Correct answer to this MCQ question number 3 is a Poisson distribution. Let us move on to question number 4. The data which best explains the difference between the highest and the lowest value. What else do you think you want from this INI set exam? So simple MCQs. Direct MCQs, the data which explains the difference between the highest and the lowest values. Answer is a range. Coefficient of variation is not the correct answer. Answer is a range. I think this is so damn easy that I don't want even to discuss this thing, that the maximum minus the minimum value, that is called as the range layer. So if let us say you take data, let us say you go to a community and you take 100 people, you check their hemoglobin levels in the community, and you find out that the lowest hemoglobin was 7 and the maximum hemoglobin was 14 gram %. So what is the range? Even my daughter who's 5 years old, she can say that 14 minus 7 is the range of the data. So all the data, 100 people, 1000 people, 10,000 people, 1 lakh people, 10 lakh people, million people, whatever number of people you are assessing, all the people are going to lie within this particular range if the data range is 14 to 7. So now let us discuss some other options. Let us talk about this option A, that is what is coefficient of variation. Coefficient of variation, it's a formula. It compares variation or variability. It compares variation or variability in different groups. So if you have two groups, this MCQ option number A, coefficient of variation, this MCQ came in the AIMS last year exam. So this is again a repeat topic. Anyways, so what is coefficient of variation? It compares variation within two groups. Group A will be there, group B will be there, and you want to compare the variation. What is the formula for comparing variations? You can compare it by using the formula SD over mean into 100. So it will give you the variation in one population where the mean and standard deviation is there. Another population, you again calculate the coefficient of variation and then you find out which one is having more variation. Simple answer. What is variance? Variance is a very tough formula. Variance option, that is option number C. It is a very tough formula. The formula is SD square. I don't know how you'll remember this formula. It's such a direct MCQ. So variance is given by a formula. I was just joking, right? So variance is given by the formula standard deviation square. What is the standard deviation? Standard deviation is given by the formula root of, speak with me, root of mean of squared deviations. Root of mean of squared deviations is what is known as standard deviation, and that is what is standard deviation. It is a root of mean or squared deviation, RMSD. Will you remember that for me, please? This is a probable MCQ. Coefficient of variation was asked last year, range was asked this year. Next year, option number C, next to next year, option number D. So I'm predicting the exam, upcoming INI set exam for next 2 years, okay? Just kidding, joking. So what is the formula for SD square? Please remember, it is square root of mean. How do you calculate mean? Mean is average, right? Summation divided by the n, that is the sample size. Root of, that is square, mean of squared deviation. So x minus x bar square, because you want to deviation is x minus x bar and you square this whole thing. So that is root of mean of squared deviation. That is what is variance, right? That is what is standard deviation. Last point is, what is this interquartile range? Very simple to understand, that if you take a quartile, core means 4, right? Quad. So you have quad core, 4 cores. So quartile is anything which divides the things into 4 parts. So you have Q1, Q2, Q3. We call them as quartile 1, quartile 2, quartile 3. The difference between quartile 1, quartile 2, quartile 2, quartile 3, quartile 1 and quartile 3, all these are called as interquartile variation, but the technical answer would be quartile 1 and quartile 3. That is where the 50% of the population will lie. That is the interquartile variation. So, or the interquartile range. So that was the other options. However, the correct answer over here is option B, beta. That is the correct answer over here. That is option B, that is range. So now let us move over to question number 5. A child suffering from steroid dependent nephrotic syndrome is on treatment and is coming to the OPD for vaccination. Which of the following is true regarding vaccination? I'll read out the options. All live vaccines under NIS can be given. All killed vaccine under NIS can be given. Only pneumococcal vaccine should be given to the child in acute phase. Oral polio vaccine is avoided in the child siblings. Right, in the child siblings. So you want to find the correct answer, right? That is what the question is. Which of the following is true? And it is a multiple options. Let me explain you 3 points and then we come back to the MCQ. Point number 1. You know that under the National Immunization Schedule, NIS, or the Universal Immunization Program, that is UIP, or any vaccine, you know, under the vaccine protocols, you know there are live vaccines, killed vaccine, recombinant vaccines, subunit vaccines, so many vaccines. Out of all these vaccines, let us talk about the live vaccines. What are the contraindications for the live vaccines? The contraindications are broadly classified into general contraindications. For example, any previous known anaphylaxis, or for example any known allergy, or any known hypersensitivity reaction, any known hypersensitivity reaction to the constituents of that particular vaccine. So these are the general contraindications. We can also have some of these specific contraindications, like in cases of pregnancy. Please remember, all live vaccines are contraindicated except MCQ, yellow fever vaccine. Yellow fever vaccine is the only exception which can be given to a pregnant female because of international health concerns, international health regulation concerns. Yellow fever is given in case of pregnancy as well, but all said and done, all live vaccines are contraindicated in pregnancy. Second, you should also know that there is another specific contraindication. It is contraindicated in all cases of immunosuppression. So now the MCQ which is there is, when will you call a child as immunosuppressed? We will call a child as immunosuppressed if the child is on, or the person is on long-term steroid therapy, or if the patient is symptomatic for HIV, symptomatic, or if the CD4 count is less than 200 cells, or if the CD4 percentage is less than 15%. All these are your pure definitions for when will you call a patient as immunosuppressed. So in these situations, live vaccines are contraindicated, killed vaccines can be given. Next, let us come to the point number 2 which you want to know before you solve that particular MCQ. Point number 2 which we can discuss is that do you know some things about the nephrotic syndrome? Of course, I don't want to impinge into medicine and pediatrics. You know much more nephrotic syndrome than what I do. I'm telling you gross things only. Nephrotic syndrome beta is what is a heavy proteinuria, that is nephrotic range proteinuria. Such massive proteinuria where you have protein is to creatinine ratio is more than 2, or if the dipstick is showing +3 +4 for urine proteins, or if it is urine albumin excretion is more than 50 milligrams per meter square per hour. So in those cases of nephrotic range proteinuria, it may lead to hypoalbuminemia. This high protein excretion and hypoalbuminemia along with hyperlipidemia causes all the biochemical disturbances in the body, and it predisposes to many of the opportunistic infections. Example particularly would be pneumococcal infections. Alongside, there could be other complications which include important as nutritional disturbances, metabolic disturbances. There could be edema, not anemia. There could be edema, metabolic disturbances, nutritional problems. So many issues are there. So we are bothered with the pneumococcal. That means pneumococcal infections are common in cases of kidney disease. Point number 2. Because all these things are happening in the child or in the patient, we need to manage the nephrotic syndrome. The management is basically based on, most of the times it is based on steroids, in case it is a steroid dependent nephrotic syndrome. So the steroid recommendations by the CDC Atlanta and the Indian Academy of Pediatrics, the recommendation is that the steroid therapy should be continued for at least 12 weeks. 12 weeks of steroid therapy should be continued, and if it is done, it actually decreases the risk of relapse. It decreases the risk of relapse. That is point number 1. Point number 2, the recommendation for steroid management in a steroid dependent nephrotic syndrome is that once you give it for 12 weeks, the steroid therapy should be tapered also. Tapering should happen for approximately 2 to 3 months over time, which causes a decline in relapses again. So this is what in nutshell I want to say, that because of the nephrotic syndrome you need to treat it, and because you want to treat it you need to give them immunosuppression. In very simple words, the immunosuppressed child, you need to give vaccination with care. So 1 and 2 points you understand. Let me tell you point number 3. Point number 3 is what are the pure recommendations for immunization of nephrotic syndrome child who is steroid dependent nephrotic syndrome and is on treatment. The recommendation is that the live vaccines should be avoided. Live vaccines are avoided. They are only given in cases of compelling situations. Compelling situations like any opportunistic infection is there in the sibling, or in cases you want to have a pre-exposure prophylaxis, things like these. So live vaccines are avoided until and unless there is compelling situations, and it is given only if the child is off immunosuppressive drugs for more than 4 than 4 weeks, for more than 4 weeks. And also, if the child is on alternate day prednisolone, which is less than 0.5 milligram per kg per dose. So in those cases, you may think of giving live vaccines. Otherwise, live vaccines in general rule is to avoid live vaccines. Point number 2, the killed vaccines, these are particularly safe. Killed vaccines are particularly safe in cases of nephrotic syndrome. Point number 3, we should also be considering giving the pneumococcal vaccine. Pneumococcal vaccine is given with some caution. It is not given in acute stage of the disease. It is not given if the child is receiving daily prednisolone, and if the child is getting a pneumococcal vaccine, depending on case to case basis, we may consider a revaccination of the child maybe after 5 years, but it is all case to case basis. So technically speaking, pneumococcal vaccine is not given in acute stage. It is only given in remission or the patient when they are off the steroid therapy or the management. Fourth recommendation is to give varicella vaccine also. Fourth recommendation is to give varicella vaccine. Again, this is a recommendation. It is not that varicella vaccine has to be given. So in cases where the child has not suffered from varicella disease or the child is predisposed to varicella infection, in those cases we may consider giving varicella vaccine if the child age is 12 months to 12 years. That time it is given as single dose, and after 12 years, that is after 13 years, it is given as 2 doses. These 2 doses are given with 4 weeks gap. These 2 doses are given with 4-week gap. We already know varicella is a live vaccine. Varicella vaccine is a live vaccine, but it may be given when the child is, again same issues, when the child is not in acute phase, only in case of remission. If the child is in a remission, please remember, very, very important, if the child is in remission, it is not given in acute phase. That is what I already told you. Live vaccines may be given in situational situations, and it is not to be given in case of immunosuppressive therapy is on. So not to be given in case immunosuppressive therapy is currently on. So with that, having understood this point number 1 about the immunization, point number 2 and the point number 3, now you are in much better position to solve this MCQ. All live vaccines under NIS can be given. What do you think about this option? Do you think we should give all the live vaccines? Answer is no, don't give live vaccines. It is generally avoided because the question is saying it is a steroid dependent nephrotic syndrome on treatment. Option number 2, B. All killed vaccines under NIS can be given. Yes, they can be given. So option B is correct. Only pneumococcal vaccine should be given to the child in acute phase. Why on earth would you give it on acute phase? Please don't give it in acute phase. Oral polio vaccine is avoided in the child sibling. So now what is happening over here? Let us say that this is a nephrotic syndrome child. This child is having nephrotic syndrome, and let us say there is a healthy sibling of this particular child. Now to this healthy sibling of this particular child, let us say you are giving bivalent OPV. Bivalent OPV will contain P1 strain and the P3 strain. Now this child is going to accept and take the OPV. It is going to go into the intestine. The viral multiplication will be there. The vaccine virus multiplication will be there, and it is shed off in the feces, and by chance through the feces it may infect the child who is on steroid dependent nephrotic syndrome on steroid therapy. So once this child may get this P1 and P3 strain from a normal child, this child may have the potential to develop VAP. VAP is nothing but vaccine associated paralytic polio. Most of the VAPs, in fact, in the world, 90% of the VAPs in the world are primarily in immunosuppressed children, and therefore the P1 and the P3 strain may modify itself, they may mutate and cause aberrant immune reactions in these children who are on steroid therapy, and therefore we say that in the healthy sibling bivalent OPV should also be avoided. So I think that sounds like a logic to you, that OPV should also be avoided. This is also correct answer. So option B is correct and option D is correct. Let us go to question number 6. You are a medical officer in PHC. So Jai India, Jai Bharat, Jai Hind. You are a medical officer in PHC. It's not very good to hear to you, but from your side. But of course, we all are committed to work as doctors in anywhere the country wants us to work. You are a medical officer in a PHC. Which of the following regimes would you advise for mass chemoprophylaxis of anemia? This is my favorite question because it generated so much controversy. I know many other resources have been given. Probably they are giving different answers, but I tell you what I know. The options given were ferrous sulfate, vitamin C, folate, B12, ferrous fumarate, iron sucrose, whatever the options. I'm not bothered with the options. Iron sucrose injection, is it possible? Answer is no. So this is direct out. Out. Done. Ferrous sulfate and ferrous fumarate both are used in different formulations. It is seen that ferrous fumarate is slightly more expensive, but all said and done, ferrous sulfate is more commonly used. So either the option is option A or option B. So just have a look at this one research. I would like to share evidence-based medicine with you now. Effectiveness, read the title first. Effectiveness, let's read the title first. Effectiveness of ferrous sulfate supplementation in the ferrous sulfate, right? Not fumarate. Ferrous sulfate supplementation in the prevention of anemia in children, a systematic literature review and meta-analysis. This is an evidence-based medicine, and this study was conducted not long ago in 2014, just 5-6 years ago. So this is a multinational study, multicentric study conducted in Portuguese with good amount of children with studies were taken. And this was published in one of the Portuguese journal as well. So I'll just read the salient line. Follow the line with me. I'm somewhere here. Iron supplementation was not associated with decreased prevalence of anemia. Not associated. Iron supplementation was not associated with decreased prevalence of anemia even with daily doses, and administration of other nutrients did not bring additional benefits compared to the exclusive administration of iron supplementation. Did you get this point? That once you're giving iron supplementation, of course the HB is going to increase. The prevalence of anemia may change, may not change. That depends actually on the prophylactic HB dose level of the people. But the point over here is that administration of other micronutrients did not bring any other additional benefits compared to the exclusive administration of iron supplement. Did you get this point? That even if you are giving vitamin C and folate and B12, there may be some benefit, but that benefit is not so statistically significant. Moreover, giving vitamin B12 general mass prophylaxis and vitamin C general prophylaxis is not very economical. If you are a clinician, I would always support you give them micronutrients, you give them zinc, you give them iron folic acid, you give them vitamin C, B12, you give whatever you have in hand. But when we are talking from program managers public health point of view, I'm telling you, sharing with you what we as program managers think when we are devising a national health program. The program should be cost effective and it should be cost benefit also. It should be affordable to the government of India. It should be acceptable to the population and to the government of India, and it should be approachable to the population and to the government of India. So anything which is beyond the preview of the system, it will never fit. It will never be giving you the impact which was the desired impact. On smaller scale it may give you, but when we are talking of a bigger scale where we are talking of 13 crore population in the whole country, it's technically not possible. So the best answer would be giving a single drug. Let me share with you another study over here, another evidence-based medicine, treatment and prevention of anemia with ferrous sulfate plus folic acid in children attending daycare centers in Brazil. So this was a randomized controlled trial conducted in Brazil for assessment of iron folic acid plus iron plus folic acid. So if you just look at the results, after prophylaxis in the non-anemic children, what did I say? After prophylaxis in the non-anemic children, the incidence of anemia did not differ between the groups. So in non-anemic children, if you give iron folic acid, the chances of people developing anemia did not change, but there was an increase in hemoglobin levels in the folic acid group. That we all agree, we all understand also. You give folic acid, the HB is going to rise, but the chance of getting anemia did not change in both the groups. Iron plus folic acid was effective for, that's the final last line of this point. Iron plus folic acid was effective for treatment of anemia and improvement of hemoglobin in the non-anemic individuals. So that is all true. So now you are going to give advice for mass prophylaxis of anemia. You have to stop anemia. What do you want to say? Stopping anemia. What do you want to say? I'm not saying to increase the HP levels. Stop anemia. What do you want to say? Answer has to be, I think you all are wise enough now. You will be marking. You must have marked. In case you have not, don't repeat this mistake. Answer is ferrous sulfate. In fact, very esteemed faculties from All India Institute Medical Sciences, Delhi were a part of large randomized controlled trials and meta-analysis which was conducted globally to assess the effect of iron sulfate, that is ferrous sulfate, and folic acid, or only iron with vitamin B12 and with other micronutrients. So it was large trial, and finally we came up with Anemia Mukt Bharat, where we are giving iron plus folic acid as mass prophylaxis to combat anemia. But all said and done, out of all these, vitamin B12s and vitamin C, it's not required. Of course, I know biochemistry. You also must be knowing biochemistry that there are iron absorbers and there are iron inhibitors, iron promoters and things like these. Vitamin C is a very potent iron absorber. But that is all technical and clinical information, which sometimes does not apply in the public health scenarios. Let us move on. Question number 7. Once clinically manifested, which of the following disease has the highest mortality? Highest mortality. What is this question talking about? It's talking about the case fatality rates. It's talking about the case fatality rates. MCQ number 1. What is a case fatality rate? It is given by the formula total number of deaths due to a disease. Total number of deaths due to a disease divided by the total number of cases of same disease multiplied by 100. This is the case fatality rate. Question number 2. Case fatality rate, what is it? Is it a rate, a ratio, or a proportion? Case fatality rate, beta, please remember, case fatality rate is a proportion. Proportion. Why do I say proportion? Because the name case fatality rate, name contains rate, but actually it's not a rate, it is a proportion. Why? Because case fatality rate, it is always expressed in percentages. It is total number of cases, out of them how many are dying. So it is a proportion, not a rate. It does not take into account, the time frame. It does not take into account the time frame. It is usually used for acute diseases. That is what is a case fatality rate. Let us have a case fatality. Look at the case fatality rate of Zika, Ebola, rabies, and Nipah. Even if any person with a reasonable IQ, I think, would be answer. Once clinically manifested, which disease has the highest case fatality rate? We have been taught from the start of the medical school, rabies has how much case fatality rate? Once it is established, it is 100% fatal. Right? So job 1 is done. Answer is rabies. Let me discuss with you A, B and D options. If you talk about Zika, Nipah and SARS, MERS, Ebola and things like these, SARS virus has a case fatality rate of 10%. SARS has a case fatality rate of 10%. MERS, that is Middle East Respiratory Syncytial Virus, it has a case fatality rate of 34%. And Ebola virus, which was, we had a lot of Ebola outbreaks in Africa, in Congo, Republic of Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo. Ebola has a case fatality rate from as low as 20-30% till 80% case fatality rate. Average we always take as 40% for Ebola. Don't think about COVID virus. I will talk about the COVID case fatality rates in just a moment to come. But at least you remember for SARS, MERS, Ebola and Zika. What is the case fatality rate in Zika? Zika has a case fatality rate of roughly approximately 10 to 20%. Right? So what you have studied till now, you know that SARS has a case fatality rate of 10%. Zika has a case fatality rate of 20%. Ebola has a case fatality rate of a big amount, that is 40%, and MERS also has a good high case fatality rate of 35%. You know this now. Nipah is another viral disease which has a case fatality rate of 50 to 80%. Again, very high case fatality rate. We average take as 60% case fatality rate. So these are some of the diseases with very high case fatality rate. Now sometimes prospective MCQs, I'm telling you, sometimes the examiners are very clever and they ask you some other case fatality rates. They'll ask you for Japanese encephalitis, typhoid, amoebiasis, things like this. So how many hours are there in a day? There are roughly around 24 to 25 hours, like of course not 25 but 24 hours. So I've remembered 24 to 30 days, 30%, sorry, not days, 24 to 30%, less than 24 to 30% case fatality rate is for which diseases? I have a mnemonic which I am going to share for the first time in any platform, live platform right now. So don't laugh at my mnemonic. It's a very weird mnemonic. If you don't like it, just throw it away. Okay. So that's just my personal mnemonic. So it's in Hindi. Excuse me for my Hindi also. So Jo Lipte Auntie types din mein. So it is J Lipte Auntie type then May. So JE, Japanese encephalitis, lepte, leptospirosis, ANT, anthrax, type, typhoid, dengue, May, malaria. So all these J. lipte, antitype, dengue. So all these diseases which you have discussed over here, they have a case fatality rate which is less than 20 to 30%. It has a case fatality rate of less than 20 to 30%. If you mark 20, very good, 25, very good, 30, very good, depending on the scenarios. Okay, please remember, I would like to warn you, dengue and malaria has a case fatality rate of 20 to 30%, and that is for untreated cases. Untreated cases of typhoid, untreated cases of dengue, untreated cases of malaria, they all have case fatality rate of less than 30%. Malaria has a case fatality rate of 5%, 4 to 5% in case with the treatment. Tuberculosis has a case fatality rate of only 2 to 4% with treatment. So you have brilliant treatment with these for these diseases, but without treatment, this is what is happening with the case fatality rate. You should also know some of the case fatality rates for the respiratory viruses like chickenpox, smallpox, varicella chickenpox, measles, rubella, diphtheria. So smallpox, measles, rubella, the center ones, they have 5% case fatality rate. Diphtheria has 10% case fatality rate. Chickenpox have 1 to 2% case fatality rate. Simple. So for all the respiratory diseases, that's the order in which I have remembered it in my mind. Chickenpox, smallpox, measles, rubella, and diphtheria. So 1 to 2%, that has the lowest case fatality rate, and as the age increases, the CFR increases, and the severity of chickenpox or varicella also increase, right? So we all know this. But generally speaking, the case fatality rates for a couple of diseases I've already talked, and rabies, I think we all know rabies is 100% case fatality rate. Now let us move to question number 8. The given life cycle belongs to leptospirosis, Yersinia pestis, hantavirus, salmonella typhi disease. So this was the image which was given. This was an image-based MCQ where the life cycle of the some of the organism was given. There was a rodent carrier, and there is the rodent is giving that particular infection in the urine, and the infection is contaminating the soil, which infects the humans as well. And then there are some of the mammals which will again have the infection in the urine, and then through the slaughterhouses and all these structures there might be more infection coming in. So what in our disease are we talking of? So whenever we are talking of the urine, infection from the urine, I think one thing comes to your mind, answer is leptospirosis. So it's a very clean MCQ with no hanky-panky, no tricky options over here. The given cycle belongs to leptospirosis, Yersinia pestis, hantavirus, Salmonella typhi. So I would like to mark direct answer, that is leptospirosis. Leptospirosis is spread by infected rodent urine. Infected rodent urine, that is what is leptospirosis. MCQs now. How does Yersinia pestis spread? Yersinia pestis is what? It is plague. Plague is spread by a vector, that is Xenopsiella Chiopis. Xenopsiella Chiopis, or in simple words we call it as a rat flea. So what happens is the rat flea is there. She will the rat flea, he or she, whatever it is, rat flea will sit on a rat, and the plague bacilli from the rat, because plague is what? It's a zoonotic disease, it's a disease of the rats. So from the rats, the plague bacilli will go into the rat flea, and the rat flea will ingest plague bacilli, and lot of propagated transmission. In the rat flea there will be propagated transmission which happens in the rat flea, and because of that there will be so much plague bacilli that the throat will be full with plague bacilli. And now this flea is a blocked flea, and this flea is going to bite any animal, humans, rats which are nearby. It becomes violent, it becomes ferocious, and it is an attacker, and it is going to bite everyone, and that's how the plague spreads. Hantavirus can be spread by droplet infection, by body fluids. Salmonella typhi, I think we all understand that it is due to poor hygiene. It is a water wash disease, typhoid, and it is due to unclean hands and that sanitation barrier, feces, flies, food mechanism, right? So that is what the answer to this is. Couple of MCQs over here on leptospirosis. It was a direct MCQ, right? So I think we all know the answer to this is leptospirosis. Couple of MCQs on leptospirosis. So for all the infectious disease, I have my own funda of doing that. I use the SIC funda. What is the SIC funda? SIC, S-I-C. S stands for the source. S stands for the source. There are two things. What is the reservoir of leptospirosis and what is the source of leptospirosis? The reservoirs are couple of mammals, or there could be rodents also which are reservoirs. If you talk about the source is the infected urine from the rodents. What is the incubation period? Incubation period, I stands for the incubation period. Incubation period is 4 days to 20 days. C stands for communicability factors or the mode of transmission. The mode of transmission or the communicability factors could be, we can have a direct spread, we can have indirect spread, we can also have inhalational or the droplet borne. What do I mean by the droplet mode of transmission? Droplet is by inhalational mode of transmission when we are milking some of the mammals like cows or buffaloes, or it could be from the slaughterhouses where the body fluids is evaporating and you inhalation of that particular leptospirosis. It can also happen through that mechanism. Direct is from infected urine. Indirect where the water is infected with the urine. So that is what you had seen over here, that the contaminated mud or contaminated soil with the infected urine is what is indirect mode of transmission, that the water source or the soil is infected. with the urine. So these are your mode of transmissions. Next S, sick, right? That's how I just remember, SIC. So source, incubation period, communicability factors, S stands for the sign and symptom or some of these special features. So what are the signs and symptoms or the special features? The leptospirosis, it can be not severe type, that is a non-icteric type of leptospirosis where there is primarily the involvement of the pulmonary system. Pulmonary complaints will be there, and in some chances there could be severe type that is called as the icteric leptospirosis, which is a severe type of leptospirosis which involves the liver disturbances plus the lung or the pulmonary morbidity. So that is what is a severe type of leptospirosis. SIC, I and C. I stands for investigation. What is the investigation we do for leptospirosis? IgM antibody ELISA test. ELISA serology is what is deployed for diagnosis of leptospirosis. And how do you control? SIC, sick. I hope you understand this. So control, how do you control leptospirosis? It has to be controlled by good sanitation, rodent control. So I think that's all said and done. And finally, you should also know the drug of choice for leptospirosis, that is penicillin G, given as the IV mode. That is what you need to remember for leptospirosis. All said and done, it was a direct MCQ, easy MCQ. What is the life cycle you see over here? Answer is leptospirosis. Let us move to question number 9. In which of the following situations will you use a sanitizer? I think you all are public health professionals, you all are epidemiologists, you have been facing, and we are very proud of the whole medical fraternity. We are very proud of you that who has participated with their full heart and on the front line, and all the doctors are actually the warriors. In which of the following situations will you use a sanitizer? I think before examining the patient, after examining the patient, after touching the patient's surroundings, or hands are visibly soiled. I think anybody with a reasonable common sense will follow the protocol for sanitization. When you enter the room, before touching the patient, before touching anything, you have to sanitize your hands. Once you sanitize your hands, you keep them covered and you keep them closed like you do in OTs. You keep them covered, you keep them closed, and then you try to examine the patient with as little touch as possible, especially in these times, in COVID pandemic times. Once we have examined the patient, again, after examining the patient, you have to use a sanitizer. You sanitize your hand, and then you may check the nursing staff registers, you may use the nursing charts, you may touch the board, you may touch the handrails, you may touch the bed sheet of the patient, you may touch the medicines of the patient, you may touch anything. Once you touch the surroundings, again after touching the surroundings, you use sanitizers. So sanitizers are definitely used in option A, B and C, and I think anybody can tell when your hands are reasonably soiled, why on earth would you use a sanitizer? You need to do hand wash. Go and wash your hands. Go and wash your hands with soap and water for 40 to 60 seconds. Sing a happy birthday song. So happy birthday song for 60 seconds, and that elevates the mood inside you, and you do hand washing for 40 to 60 seconds with soap, ample soap and water when the hands are visibly soiled. So answer to this is option A, B and C are correct. Let us move to question number 10. HPV vaccine, human papilloma vaccine, is based on E18, E11, L1, L2, L3, L33. I don't know what options are these. HPV vaccine is based on human papilloma virus. Human papilloma virus, different strains are there. So 16 and 18, 6 and 11 MCQs. 6 and 11 are the most common strains which are implicated for genital warts. For genital warts, anogenital warts, most common strains are 6 and 11. 16 and 18, these have the highest risk or the maximum risk for malignancy or the oncogenic potential. Malignancy or the oncogenic potential is highest with 16-18. So that was about the human papilloma virus. Based on this, if I help you understand that what are the vaccines which are available, you can have different vaccines, like you can have Cervarix, Gardasil, nonavalent Gardasil, that is the Gardasil 9 as well. In all these vaccines, which are the strains which you would like to put the first, at first? You're scared of cancers, right? It's cervical cancers. You put 16, 18. So Cervarix vaccine has strain 16 and 18. They are of course trying for the 6 and 11 as well. But right now Cervarix which is available is HPV 16 and HPV 18 because they have the highest oncogenic potential. The Gardasil, they moved ahead and they took HPV 16 and 18, plus they also took HPV 6 and 11, which was the most common virus implicated for the anogenital warts. Gardasil 9 went way beyond them. They took 16 and 18 plus 6 and 11 plus 31 and 33 plus 45 plus 52 and 58. They took all these strains, which are the most common strains which are responsible for the human papilloma virus induced or associated cervical cancers today. So you have these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9 nonavalent Gardasil 9. So now if you understand this, that what are the HPV strains, you also know what are the HPV vaccines which are available. Now at the third level, I am going to talk to you about the HPV genome. You all know that the genome can be broadly having two areas. One is the encoding areas, the genes which are responsible for coding, some coding, and there are some non-coding, just non-coding genes. Non-coding genes do not have any utility, at least in the vaccine system. Encoding genes could be of broadly two types. The genes which are responsible for coding, they code something. The coding genes can be of two types. We can have the coding genes for viral replication, which helps the virus to replicate, that you make more copies. That viral replication genes are the genes which are deployed when the HPV virus enters the host cell. So when they enter the host cell, the first thing they have to do is replicate. Are you getting it? So once, let us say this is the virus, let us say that this, my fist is a virus. Once it enters the host cell, it is going to replicate. This replication is pretty early in phase and therefore we call them as early genes. The early genes are viral replication genes. The later part, once the replication happens, now there are capsid proteins and there are structural proteins. So now you have the structural protein coding genes. The structural protein coding genes come after the early genes and therefore, common sense, they are called as the late genes. So you can have E genes or you can have L genes in the HPV genome. The E genes in HPV genome are E1, E2, E3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So many E genes are there, early genes. In the L, you have two, L1 and the L2. L1 is the major capsid protein encoding gene. L2 is the minor capsid coating encoding gene. Simple. The E1, E2, E3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Out of this, you just take out this E3. Because E3 is a ubiquitin related coding gene. It is ubiquitin related coding gene and it technically is not involved in viral replication. So you can very safely just delete this E3 structure. So you now have E1 to E7, E1, E2, E4, E5, E6, E7, which are viral replication gene and they are also called as the early gene. Out of these, the 6 and 7, early genes 6 and 7, they are very aggressive genes. They are mainly responsible for the oncogenic potential of the human papilloma virus. These are the main things which are responsible for the oncogenic potential of the human papilloma virus. And if I tell you that E6 is such a bad gene, it knocks off your P53 gene, which is a tumor suppressor gene, and this very angry looking E7 gene. It knocks off your retinoblastoma gene, which is again a tumor suppressive genes, and because these two are blocked, the patient may land up into malignant mitosis and meiotic stages and cause the cancer oncogenic potential. E1, E2, E4 and E5, these are primarily responsible for replication. Oncogenic is E6 and E7. L1, L2 is the major and the minor structural protein coding genes. So now when, let us say you are a researcher, I tell you that please make me an HPV vaccine, you will take replication gene, yes or no? No. You will take, what you can do is, you can take the L1 genes, the L1 particles. The L1 particles will combine together and form VLPs, that is vaccine-like particles, vaccine-like particle products. So these VLPs get together and they make a cluster. They make a cluster which will look like the HPV vaccine, but it does not have the genes, early genes. If you give the simple na, if you give early genes in the HPV vaccine, the vaccine is going to replicate in your body. We don't want to do that. We just want to generate an immune response. So you take the cluster genes, the VLP, vaccine-like particle genes. So which genes would you like to take? The L1, the major or the minor? We take the major. So this whole HPV vaccine game is based on the L1 gene. So if you look at this image now, you can see that the major capsid proteins are there, minor capsid proteins L1, L2 are there, E1, E2, E3, E4, E5, E6, E7, all these things are there. You have the oncoproteins E6 and E7. So out of this, the vaccines are primarily dependent on the major capsid protein, and based on this, if you understand this whole thing, HPV vaccine is based on E18, E18, E11 does not exist in nature, L33 does not exist. Best answer is L1 gene. If I take option E also, that is L1 and L2, still the answer would be L1 only. Still the answer would be L1 only, because the vaccine is primarily based on the L1 structural protein, which is the major capsid protein region. Let us move on to question number 11. Identify the lovely organism shown in the image. You can see such a cute little looking roundish worm called as the roundworm, called as the Ascariasis lumbricoides. So that's the organism. You need to, like, you can't ask this organism, hello, what's your name? So you need to identify this organism and call it a name. We have given it a name, the roundworm, because it is round and it is not Ankylostoma entropius and strongyloid stercoralis. If you have seen some of the microbiology slides as well, madam had been courteous enough to share many of these images in your lectures also. Ankylostoma entropius and strongyloid stercoralis, they all are very small. They are ranging from 8 to 11 millimeters. Around 10 millimeters. But Ascariasis is a pretty long worm. It can range from 15 to 30 centimeters. 15 to 30 centimeters, that is one small scale. So this big worms can be there, and it is of course macroscopically visible. Identify the organism. Answer to this is, direct answer, Ascariasis. Let me just share with you the virtual image for Entropius vermicularis, strongyloids stercoralis, or the hookworm disease. Hookworm in a parasite. So if you look at all these things, these are all very small, ranging from 8 to 11 millimeters in size. The Entropius vermicularis, also called as the pinworm, the strongyloids, also called as the threadworm, and hookworm is hookworm. Hookworm could be of two types. We can have the ankylostoma duodenale, or we can have duodenale, or we can have the Necator americanus. So all these are very small things, and the only odd one out was Ascariasis, and the best answer over here is Ascariasis. A little words of MCQ over here, that which is the most common soil transmitted helminthic infection in our country. The most common soil transmitted helminthic infection in our country is Ascariasis. Question number 1. Question number 2. Which is the most common soil transmitted helminthic infection leading to blood loss? Answer to this would be hookworm disease. hookworm disease causes maximum of anemia or the blood loss. Still comparing Escherichiasis with hookworm. Still comparing Escherichiasis with hookworm, the size of Escherichiasis we already have talked 10 to 30 centimeters. The size of hookworm is 8 to 13 millimeters. What is the infective thing in the Escherichiasis? The infective thing in Escherichiasis is the egg. This is a potential MCQ for you, star mark MCQ for you. Egg is the infective form in the Escherichiasis, whereas in the hookworm disease, the larva is the infective form. Eggs are not infective. Eggs have to mature to form larva, and the larvas will be infective. If you just look at the life cycle of both these things, that is the Escherichiasis and the hookworm, can you appreciate this fact that the egg is there? It is directly ingested. So who is infective over here? The egg is directly infective. Whereas on the other hand, the egg is there, it has to mature to form a larva, and the larva is going to penetrate. So who is infective to humans? Is it the egg? No, it is the larval form. So in hookworm, the larva is infective, right? Very important. In Escherichiasis, how many eggs are laid per day? 2.5 to 3.5 lakh eggs per day are laid by Escherichia, big number of eggs. Whereas in hookworm disease, they lay only 5 to 30,000 eggs per day. Necator americanus has 5 to 10,000 eggs, and the Ankylostoma duodenale has 20 to 30,000 eggs per day. They release that much amount of eggs. Who is the reservoir and who is the source? If you talk about the reservoir and the source, it is same. It is the reservoir is the human for soil transmitted helminthic infection, and the source is the soil. Similarly, over here it is human as the reservoir and source is the soil. What about the soil now? What about the soil? The soil in Escherichiasis, I have remembered it this way, that it's a long worm, it is a sturdy worm. Long worm, sturdy worm requires a hard soil, a clayey soil. Whereas on the other hand, the soil in the hookworm, it's a small worm, it needs a porous, soft soil. It needs a porous, soft soil. What is the temperature? The temperature is same for both Escherichiasis and hookworm. The temperature maintenance, they love to stay in 24 to 32 degrees Celsius. 24 to 32 degrees Celsius, it is same for Escherichiasis or hookworm. What is the lifespan? For how much time does the Escherichiasis can stay? Lifespan for Escherichiasis, what color do you want? Let us go with blue. Lifespan for Escherichiasis is for 1 year, whereas the hookworm is for 1 to 4 years. Slightly longer. Longer life. The smaller thing, long life. Longer thing, small life, right? So the extrinsic incubation period. The extrinsic incubation period for Escherichiasis is 2 to 3 weeks. I'm sorry because I'm short of space. I've just stuffed in over here. Escherichiasis is 2 to 3 weeks. Please remember 2 to 3 weeks. Whereas the extrinsic incubation period for hookworm disease is 5 to 10 days for Necator americanus. So that's all that you need to remember for your most of the things in your exam. Let us move ahead. Question number 12. Transplacental transmission of the organism given in the image which causes microcephaly or microcephaly, whatever you call, is Zika, rubella, CMV, Nipah. This is a transplacental transmission. Two things over here. Some infection, mummy to child, and there is happening of microcephaly. Please try to remember and try to understand that microcephaly or microcephaly is associated with congenital infections, specifically talking congenital rubella syndrome. It is also associated with congenital CMV infections. It is also associated with congenital varicella infections. It is also associated with congenital Zika viral infections and few other infections which are of course not required for your MCQ exam. Congenital rubella syndrome, if you talk, CRS, that is the congenital rubella syndrome, if you talk, it is associated with cataract, cardiac defects, and deafness or hearing loss. This is the major thing. There can be sometimes microcephaly also, plus or minus. In congenital CMV infection, I have a mnemonic. C stands for Kan, right? In Hindi we say Kan, that is C. We have hearing loss. M stands for motor loss. V stands for vision loss. So in CMV, categorically in CMV infected children, congenital CMV infection, there might be hearing loss, motor loss, vision loss. There could also be a classical triad of CMV, classical triad of congenital CMV, that is jaundice plus petechiae, coagulation abnormalities plus hepatosplenomegaly. So megaly. So hepatosplenomegaly plus petechiae plus jaundice is the classical triad for congenital CMV infections. In congenital varicella infections, there could be lumbosacral cord aplasia, which may lead to hypoplastic limbs. There may be associated neurological deficits. There may be hypoplastic limbs, neurological deficits. There may be very delayed deep tendon reflexes. So this is what is categoric for congenital varicella. CMV has hearing loss, motor loss, vision loss. Rubella has cardiac defects, cataract and deafness. And there can be microcephaly in everyone. Everyone can have microcephaly. But for congenital Zika disease, the characteristic is microcephaly. Microcephaly is a characteristic for Zika. Why? Because there is brain atrophy. Why? Because the mother may get Zika infection and Zika is going to spread to the Hofbauer cells, and which further is going to harm the child and cause brain atrophy leading to microcephaly. There could also be Guillain-Barré syndrome, microcephaly. This is characteristic of Zika. So if you look at the question back again, options are Zika, rubella, CMV, Nipah. In the image they had given, there is a mother who is pregnant. There is a mother who's pregnant, and there is a big time hint, that is the mosquito, Aedes mosquito was there. There is another big time hint, I don't know if the hint was there, regarding the Hofbauer cells which were infected. This is typical for Zika, right? Let us have a few words about Zika right now. Zika disease, if you see, what are the sick features? Same story. The sick features, SIC, and another page I'll write the SIC. What is the source? The source is Aedes mosquito, which is infective. And the source could be an infected person also. Why infected person? Because the mode of transmission could involve maybe the body fluids or sexual contact with that infected person. The incubation period, I stands for incubation period. Incubation period is, we don't know much about Zika disease. Some of the research says 5 to 15 days. C stands for communicability factors or the mode of transmission. The mode of transmission could be bite of a mosquito, which we have already discussed, but it could also be having a sexual contact through semen, body fluids or semen, and very importantly, we can have infection of the Hofbauer cells, which may lead to vertical transmission. In simple words, it may lead to transplacental mother to child transmission. The sick features, the next sick features, that is the sign and symptoms of Zika disease. Zika disease could primarily, do you know that if you have seen that image where we talked about this image, where we talked about Zika disease, in Zika disease, there is 1,75,000 cases confirmed. Out of them, 5 lakh cases were actually suspected of Zika. Out of them, 2,439 cases were actually having Zika syndrome in the child. So what I want you to appreciate the point over here is that, do you know that 80% of all infections, Zika infections, are asymptomatic, or they are very mild that the people don't even come to know. So that means that Zika is going to spread, but people won't even realize that. 80%. In some people who realize that Zika is there might be maculopapular rash. There might be maculopapular rash with an intense amount of arthralgia. In certain cases where if the Zika is there in a pregnant female, it may land up into congenital Zika. That is what the question was all about. It may land up into congenital Zika infection, which is associated with microcephaly and Guillain-Barré and so on, other neurological deficits. It may also be associated with the motor loss. It may also be associated with brain atrophies, right, and microcephaly and so on and so forth. But what we know is that Zika is not a dangerous disease. Zika has a case fatality rate of 8 to 10%, and Zika, 80% of infections are mild infections. So what we know usually is what is the media news, but the technical news is 80% are asymptomatic or mild infections. What is the investigation for Zika? We don't have any antibody test for Zika. We do have the antibody test, ELISA test, but they are not approved for diagnosis of Zika. Diagnosis of Zika is done using RT-PCR way. RT-PCR, direct Zika virus isolation, is what is the best answer. How do you control Zika? No option for control. Like, of course, we do have an option for controlling, but we don't have any antivirals for Zika. It is only by virtue of control of the mosquito. So vector control, and good amount of fluid rehydration for the patient, and so on and so forth. So these are a couple of things which you need to remember for Zika. With that, we have completed about the Zika disease. Just 2 points about the COVID-19 infections. COVID-19 infections, you need to understand there is a case fatality rate and infection fatality rate. What is a case fatality rate? We already had discussed that case fatality rate is total number of deaths due to a disease divided by the total number of cases multiplied by 100. So in a scenario like COVID-19, where the number of cases you don't know, if you test the cases, the number of cases, the denominator is going to swell up and the deaths are same. So the case fatality rate will be lower. But in case you don't test, if you test less, then the cases will be very less and the deaths are same, so the case fatality rate will be higher. So your case fatality rate was actually dependent on your testing capacities. Are you getting it? So therefore, case fatality rate cannot be a very good determinant for understanding the mortality parameters in COVID-19 infections. We may use infection fatality rate in many of the researches now. So in infection fatality rate, we take the number of suspected cases of COVID-19 that we are seeing. So in those cases, it is seen that the COVID-19 has infection fatality rate, or in generally word we say case fatality only. It is ranging to around 1 to 1.5% case fatality rate or the infection fatality rate. In developing countries where the resources are not very high, in those cases 2 to 4% case fatality rate is observed, but all said and done, case fatality rate is generally taken around 1% to 1.5% for COVID-19 infections. So please remember all these small points. So with that, we have completed the MCQ discussion for community medicine MCQs from INI SET November 2020 exam. Now I would like to ask you a very important vital question. Are you still preparing for your NEET exam 2021 or the next year mid-year INI SET exams? Do you think so you're preparing? So in case you have already achieved what you want to get, you are rank 1 or 10 or 5 or 6 rank in aims, and you know what you're doing, all the very best. But for those students who are right now in the dilemma, just give me 5 minutes. I want to discuss very salient points from my personal experience with you. So one is, there might be some students who are still thinking, should I take the seat or not seat? I have got pediatrics, but I love medicine a lot, and I don't know what should I do, or I am getting anesthesia, I want this, whatever you're getting. So are you confused with your seat? If the answer is yes, that means you are in the most average area where everybody, most of us are. In that case, I would always say that, I always say in the classes also, that getting confusion is a very positive report. If you're getting confused, that means you are thinking of something. If you're not confused, that means either you are superhuman, you are God's avatar, or you are the most lowest person who's not bothered with anything. Whatever it is, let it happen. Either you go into that phase, philosophical stage, or in case you are confused, that is a positive note. Because what happened with me was, when I was writing these exams, I was getting the community medicine seat, and there was DA anesthesia, and diploma in ENT also was available, and other pre and paraclinical seats. So what you do is, in case you are in that confusion stage, so what you do is, you assess yourself whether you want to do the clinical seat, or you can afford to take a pre or a paraclinical seat. You write down what are the pros, and you write down what are the cons. Please write down. Please write down, because that will help you introspect from inside. Mark my words, that will help you introspect from inside what is your objective in life. Can you, if your objective is just to stay cool and calm, then you are okay with the pre and the paraclinical stuff. But in case you are very aggressive, you want the patient data handling, you should go with the clinical seat. So write down what are the positive things, and you write down what are the negative things in case I take this seat, in case I take this seat. That will help you focus, that will help you understand and introspect your goals in life, your goals in life. So please remember, getting confused, I would always say, is a positive thing. You should get confused, because having no confusion means you have not done what you're supposed to do. Next, in case there is confusion is resolved, and you are still preparing for your NEET INI set exam, you know that you need to redo it, and you think you can redo it. I would like to say over here that there is so much uncertainty in the past 2-3 years, that at least I have seen, and you also have witnessed in your entrance exam systems, that we don't know what is going to come again. Right? So if you're getting any seat, I advise to my near and dear ones, I don't know about you, that's the beauty of this platform, that in a live class, sometimes you get scared, you have that hesitancy in talking to students, or the student has hesitancy in talking to me, that what will sir say, I think what will she say or he say. So in this platform, it's very like open discussion between you and me. It's just the video which is speaking. So I tell to my near and dear ones, because there's so much uncertainty, if you're getting a decent branch which is in your acceptability level, which is acceptable to you, it is affordable to you, it is approachable to you, and it is their acceptability level, please take it and just say thank you to this PG entrance stuff. So in case you are still appearing for your NEET INI set exam, please remember that you need to focus, beta. Focus. What do I mean to say by focus? You have to drink about the NEET exam, you have to think about NEET exam, you have to watch for NEET exam, you have to sleep NEET exam, you have to wake NEET exam. It has to be NEET exam all the time. You remember, there is agent, host, environment. Having agent with host and environment does not cause disease. It is only the interaction between them which cause the disease. Similarly, for a student who is prepared, there has to be luck which is there, and there has to be an opportunity which is there. Only then there will be success. That is what I say. The agent, host, environment triangle is very important triangle. You have to focus, beta, because once you focus, You are breathing in that you want success, and that will cause that felt need within you. And once you get that felt need that I want to do this, at that junction you automatically the things will fall into place. There might be students who have not got very good ranks in their INI set exam, although they had prepared very nicely. So probably you were lacking somewhere. You might be lacking in your MCQ things, in the revision or something like this, you might be lacking. So you need to understand that the luck or the opportunity or the preparation all have to strike at once. To make that strike, you have to get that felt need, because that is what is important to you. There are many doctors who have done MD anatomy, who have done physiology, who have done community medicine, microbiology. These are all considered lower branches, but still there are people who are doing MD, MS anatomy, and they are earning much better than MD maybe dermatology or MD radiology. So it is all dependent on the felt need. No branch is big, no branch is small. You do not choose the branch. The branch does not define you as a person. You should be defining that the branch is going to, like, you will be the brand ambassador for that branch. And if you have that passion, any branch can give you billions and millions of gold coins for you. So please remember that you have to focus day in, day out when you are selecting, when you are preparing for your examination, because focus will help you. You have to be like Arjun. It will help you in achieving what you want to achieve in this session. You have to be like Arjun. You have to see that bird's eye only. So focus and focus and focus is your only help, right? Next, point number 3. In case you are confident now, you are not confused that I should take this branch or not branch. You are focused that I am going to do this and I am going to do this now only. Come to my third point. Third point is, if you are focused and you are not confused, now you please sit down and make a strategy. Make a plan. The problem will never be a bad plan. I know we all are very good planners. You all are very good planners, brilliant planners. The problem will be in implementation of the plan. Make a plan, write the plan, paste the plan on the wall of study table. So wherever you're sitting and studying, paste it over there so that you see it day in, day out. That's the only way to breathe in, breathe out. NEET exam, INI set exam, upcoming 3 months. So you see that table and you see that plan and you sit on your table every day so that it helps you focus back again. Because there should be some bigger thing for you to achieve. So please write a plan, share a plan. The problem will never be the plan. The problem will be implementation of the plan. Tell that plan. Please remember that after 3 months, if you are standing in front of a mirror, you should be standing with confidence that yes, I did my best. You can lie to the whole world. You cannot never lie to yourself. You can lie to me. You can lie to parents, friends, girlfriend, boyfriend. You can lie to anyone. But you cannot never lie to yourself. You have to be honest to yourself at the end of the day. If you have put in your best, I don't think this agent host environment triangle can stop you. If you have put in your best. So you have to make a plan, stick to the plan. I personally am not that kind of person who's going to tell you that, bache, please start with pathology and then do medicine, or do medicine and then do pathology. I don't understand that, because for me, very odd things work. Maybe for you some other things might work. So I have seen students who have done only MCQs, they got brilliant ranks. I have seen students who have done theory, they got also brilliant ranks. I have seen students who have done theory, they could not get brilliant ranks. I have seen students with MCQs, they could not clear the exam also. So different things happen, different opportunities are there, different mental mindset is there, different family background is there, different circumstances are there. I cannot tell you that what is the plan which is going to work. My plan will never work for you. Your plan is not going to work for me. So whatever you have, you make a plan and please stick to the plan. So point number 1, you should not be confused. Point number 2, you should be focused. Point number 3 is make a plan. Please remember that whatever you are, mark my words, my senior told me this line. I'm going to finish this lecture now with this line. My senior told me, your conduct is your responsibility. Whatever me I have as a faculty, as a mentor or teacher, whatever you want to call me, I wanted to deliver the things to you. I have delivered. I know from within my heart what passion did I deliver. Now it is up to you whether you want to use it or not use it. Bache, your parents are watching, your friends are watching you. Your next 3 months are going to define you what you will do for the next 30, 40 years of your life. So you have to breathe in, breathe out for your next exam. Your conduct is your responsibility only. I can't do that. Your parents will not be able to do that. You have to bear the responsibility of whatever you're doing for next 3 months. Stay honest. Don't lose focus. Do not get confused. You make a plan and stick to the plan, and then you talk to me that, sir, I did whatever I wanted, still I did not get it. Maybe you're lacking somewhere, right? Last 3 cents for you. Last 3 cents for you, bache. Please remember, towards these 3 months, please, you need to revise. Whatever you have revised, you need to re-revise. Whatever you have re-revised, you need to re-revise. Don't study anything new. Exam has to be simple. Because they are changing patterns, they can't ask you out of the boxes MCQs. Exam will be simple. High yield points, you already know. I have done whatever best we can. We are always available on Telegram. We have our social media platforms. You have the beautiful Marrow Links platform. You have the YouTube platform, Telegram groups, WhatsApp groups. You have everything which is convenient to you here. What else do you want in life? You just have to, bache, please remember, I am folding my hands and telling you, you have to revise, revise, revise and revise. Don't study anything new. MCQs, MCQs and MCQs. Spend maximum time in solving MCQs, because you can't play cricket in Eden grounds while playing gully cricket with me, and this is the line I tell every class. That to play in Eden Gardens, you have to practice in Eden Gardens. To give an MCQ exam in real exam, you have to practice MCQs. You cannot sit down with me and do theory chit chat all the time and without practicing MCQs. Just switch off this thing now. Start solving MCQs at last. Do Q banks, do GTs, grant tests. That is what is going to help you. That is what is focus, and that is going to help you introspect that where you actually stand. So with that, I would like to leave you with this line again. Your conduct is your responsibility. It's not mine. It's not anybody else. You have to bear the responsibility. You are mature enough. Thank you so much for watching this module. All the very best. Best wishes. I pray to God that you all succeed in your endeavors very, very fast and very soon. Best of luck. Bye-bye. Thanks.